Good evening, everyone. This evening's talk will be divided into two sections. Firstly, we will hear the teachings on the origin and nature of the three gunas. And secondly, we will look at the ways in which we may recognize the three gunas in our daily lives. Much of the first section is with reference to just one sutra, number 18, in part 2 of the Sadhana Pada, in the 8 limbs of yoga, that was set down in Sanskrit by the great Indian sage Patanjali around the year 400 CE. Its translation and the commentaries, which will be given this evening, are extracts from pages 171 to 179, in a book published in 1961 by Professor I.K. Timely entitled The Science of Yoga. Born in India, Professor Timely joined the Theosophical Society in India in 1919, when he was 21 years of age. He received his PhD in inorganic chemistry at London University and later became Professor of Chemistry at the Allahabad University in India. In retirement, he studied Sanskrit and wrote many articles, books, and translations on theosophy and Hindu religious texts. As well as being an influential scholar in yoga and Eastern philosophy, he was also a former leader of the Theosophical Society at Adyar and was awarded the Subarrow Gold Medal for his contribution to theosophical literature. So in order to comprehend the essential nature of the three guna, we first need to refer to the emergence of Prakriti and Purusha at the beginning of a manifested universe. The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, states that our divine sparks of being are radiated from the undifferentiated source, the one unknown deity known as Par-Brahm, with its veil undifferentiated nature known as Mula Prakriti. It emerges from this and is also stated in the Secret Doctrine that the two primal aspects of this one unknown deity are Purusha, the spiritual self, which is subjective, and Prakriti, the spiritual nature, which is objective. We will recognize from the definition given in the Secret Doctrine that the scene referred to in Sutra 18 refers to Prakriti, the spiritual nature, and Purusha, as we said, is the spiritual self. I will now read to you Sutra 18. The scene, objective side of manifestation, consists of the elements and sense organs, is of the nature of cognition, activity, and stability. And these are Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, and has for its purpose providing the Purusha with experience and liberation. Professor I.K. Timely then comments on his translation of Sutra 18. In this one brief sutra, Patanjali has analyzed and placed before us the fundamental facts concerning the nature of the phenomenal world and its perception and purpose. The professor comments on the relationship of Purusha to Prakriti. When the Purusha comes into contact with Prakriti at the beginning of an evolutionary cycle, this contact disturbs the equilibrium of the three guna and gradually brings into play the forces of Prakriti. The vehicles of consciousness are slowly being organized and the powers latent in Prakriti are being unfolded. The professor continues. The contact of Purusha and Prakriti results in the emergence of a duality, the subjective and objective sides of nature. The Purusha, which is the essence or substratum of the subjective, and the Prakriti, which is that of the objective side of duality. He continues, the purpose of the phenomenal world is to provide experience and ultimately liberation for the Purusha. And it is necessary for the Purusha to descend into matter and pass through the evolutionary process before he can become perfect and free from the domination of matter. The phenomenal world provides the necessary experience through which alone evolution of his vehicles and unfolding of his consciousness can take place. He defines the sutra further by explaining that the perception of the phenomenal world is the result of the interaction of the bhuta, which are elements, and the indriyas, the sense organs. So the scene, prakriti, the phenomenal world, consists of the elements, the bhuta, which are earth, water, air, fire, and ether, and the sense organs, indriyas, which are nose, smell, mouth, taste, skin, touch, eyes, sight, and ears, sound, through which the Purushas, individual consciousnesses, that's us, gain the experience that leads to liberation. He also defines Sutra 18 as stating that the essential nature of all the phenomena, which are the objects of perception, are the result of the play of the three guna, which find expression through cognition, activity, and stability, and that the whole structure of the manifested universe, according to this philosophy, is considered to rest on these three qualities or attributes of Prakriti. The professor highlights that Sutra 18 is stating that the purpose and function of the phenomenal world is twofold. First, to provide experience for the Purushas who seem to be evolving in it, and secondly, through this experience, to lead them gradually to emancipation and enlightenment. He also states that the gunas lie at the very basis of the manifested world, and even the working of the mind through which we try to comprehend their nature depends upon their interplay. He continues, the advances which have taken place in the field of the physical sciences and the light this is thrown on the structure of matter and the nature of physical phenomena have now placed us in a position to gain a faint glimpse into the essential nature of the guna. Importantly, he states that these three principles, which ultimately determine the nature of every phenomena, are all connected with motion and may be called different aspects of motion. They are 1, vibration, sattva, which involves rhythmic motion of particles, like a number of soldiers drilling on a parade ground. 2, mobility, rajas, which involves non-rhythmic motion of particles with transference of energy, like a number of people walking in a crowd. And 3, inertia, tamas, which involves relative position of particles, like a number of prisoners confined in separate cells. He continues, let us take the sensuous phenomena which are observed through the 5 sense organs. Sight, the cognition of visual phenomena depends upon the presence of light vibrations, which by their action on the retina of the eye give the impression of form and color. Sound, auditory phenomena depend upon sound vibrations, which acting upon the drum of the ear produce the sensation of sound. Touch, the sensation of heat, etc., depends upon the impact of moving atoms and molecules on the skin. Taste and smell, the sensation of taste and smell experienced are determined by the action of chemical substances on the membranes of the palate and nose, and the nature of the chemical substance determined by the relative position and the nature of the atoms in the molecules. In every case, we find vibration or rhythmic motion, sattva, mobility or irregular motion, rajas, and inertia or relative position, tamas, at work determining the nature of the sensuous phenomena. Bearing in mind that the Science of Yoga was published in 1961, the professor goes on to say that up until this time, we have assumed the presence of particles, which by their motion determine the phenomena. But what are these particles? Science tells us that these particles are also nothing but combinations of protons, neutrons, and electrons. The electrons whirling around the nucleus of protons and neutrons at tremendous speeds and determining the properties of the atoms. In view of the discovery of the equivalence and incontrovertibility of mass and energy, it will probably be found ultimately that the nucleus of the atom is also an expression of energy, and that the ultimate basis of the manifested universe is nothing but motion or energy. The proem at the beginning of Volume 1 of The Secret Doctrine states that there is nothing in fact and reality absolutely motionless within the universal soul. Professor Timely continues, we see therefore that all properties can be reduced to their simplest elements: wave motion, prakasha, action, kriya, and position, sthiti, at least as far as the physical universe is concerned. And since these are also the ideas associated with the nature of the three guna, science has, to a certain extent, corroborated this. He states that it is true that the guna underlie the whole manifested universe, not only the physical world, but a study of their interplay in the physical world may help the student to gain a faint glimpse into their real nature. Professor Timely refers to the three gunas in relation to each other when he states, wave motion or vibration, sattva, is a harmonious combination of mobility, rajas, and inertia, tamas. And it follows that sattva is a combination of rajas and tamas. So the development of sattva is the harmonization of the existing rajas and tamas, all aspects of motion. So, what does all this have to do with us and our current state of evolution? In Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, H.P. Blavatsky reminds us that the pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit, through a long series of metempsychoses and reincarnations. In a footnote on page 68 and 69 of The Secret Doctrine, 1, H.P. Blavatsky says that Adi Shankaracharya refers to sattva as buddhi in his translation of the Bhagavad Gita, as being antakarana refined by sacrifices and other sanctifying operations. So we're introduced here to the word antakarana. However, according to HPB, the antakarana is an aspect or function of the lower mind that retains its original purity, active whenever there is a spiritual aspiration. It is, figuratively speaking, a path or bridge that acts as a two-way communication. Through antakarana, the spiritual influence of the higher manas is conveyed to the personality, so that all good and noble activity of the lower manas can reach the higher. She also states that whatever meaning the various schools may give the term sattva is, sorry, I've read that incorrectly. Whatever meaning the various schools may give the term, sattva is the name given among occult students of the Arya Sangha school to the dual monad or Atma Buddhi. And Atma Buddhi on this plane corresponds to Parabrahm and Mula Prakriti on the higher plane. Professor Taimni says that the Gunas are referred to over and over again in the Bhagavad Gita. And there is hardly any important book in Sanskrit in which the word triguna, three guna, does not occur. Here are some quotations from Discourse 14 of the Bhagavad Gita, translated by Aladi Mahadeva Shastri on the three gunas. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. These gunas, born of Prakriti, bind fast in the body, the indestructible. Of these, sattva, which from its stainlessness is lucid and healthy, binds by attachment to happiness and by attachment to knowledge. Know thou Rajas to be of the nature of passion, the source of thirst and attachment. It binds fast, the embodied one, by attachment to action. But know that Tamas to be born of wisdom, unwisdom, deluding all embodied beings by heedlessness, indolence, and sloth. It binds fast. Sattva attaches to happiness, Rajas to action, while Tamas, enshrouding wisdom, attaches on the contrary to heedlessness. Sattva arises predominating over Rajas and Tamas, and Rajas over Sattva, and Tamas over Sattva and Rajas. When at every gate in this body there shoots up wisdom light, then it may be known that Sattva is predominant. Greed, activity, the undertaking of works, unrest, desire, these arise when Rajas is predominant. Darkness, heedlessness, inertness, and error, these arise when Tamas is predominant. If the embodied one meets death when Sattva is predominant, then he attains to the spotless regions of the knowers of the highest. Meeting death in Rajas, he is born among those attached to action, and dying in Tamas, he is born in the wombs of the irrational. The fruit of good action, they say, is sattvic and pure, while the fruit of Rajas is pain, and ignorance is the fruit of Tamas. From sattva arises wisdom, and greed from Rajas. Heedlessness and error arises from Tamas, and also ignorance. Those who follow Sattva go upwards. The Rajasic remain in the middle, and the Tamasic who follow in the course of the lowest guna go downwards. Having crossed beyond these three gunas, which are the source of the body, the embodied one is free from birth, death, decay, and pain, and attains the immortal. So the words of the wise would suggest that man's self-devised effort will lead him to the stage where he may ultimately transcend all three guna. For us, that may seem a long way away, but we can always make a start. And I'm sure many of us already have. Professor Timely states that when the Purusha comes into contact with Prakriti at the beginning of an evolutionary cycle, this contact disturbs the equilibrium of the three gunas and gradually brings into play the forces of Prakriti. The vehicles of consciousness are slowly being organized, and the powers latent in Prakriti are being unfolded. But after evolution has reached a sufficiently advanced stage and the desire for self-realization is born within the soul, Rajas and Tamas have to gradually be replaced with Sattva. So the object in yoga is to harmonize Rajas and Tamas into Sattva. And a perfect harmonization means the virtual disappearance of the opposites and the attainment of a condition which is free from the opposites. Sattva is said to reflect consciousness, while Rajas disturbs it and Tamas absorbs it. A helpful analogy is to visualize Sattva as being like pure water, reflecting its surroundings in full detail while manifesting its clarity. Rajas is being like water containing some sand, which has been agitated so that the surroundings are clouded and not clearly visible. And Tamas as being like stagnant water, where the surroundings have become completely engulfed. So Rajas reflects consciousness. So Sattva reflects consciousness, Rajas disturbs it, and Tamas absorbs it. Following are extracts from a book entitled Practical Ayurveda from the Shivananda Yoga Vedanta Center, which may serve to verify what we've heard so far already and suggest some ways to increase our levels of sattva. The nature of the mind is inherently sattvic, clear and harmonious. However, by experiencing negative thoughts and emotions, such as greed and fear, the mind loses its pure quality and becomes rajasic, restless and agitated, or tamasic, lethargic and resistant. The goal in both yoga and Ayurveda is to make sattva the predominant guna in the mind. Meditation, positive affirmations, and a healthy diet remove rajas and tamas and increase sattva, calming and uplifting the mind. And then there's a description of sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva, this is the energy of harmony and clarity. It brings contentment and peace, as well as revealing truth, making us feel centered and strong. Sattva is dominant in a healthy mind. Under the influence of sattva, a person may be adaptable, eloquent, enthusiastic, positive, courageous, independent, intelligent, sympathetic, calm, contented, devoted, humble. Rajas. This is the energy of movement, agitation, expansion, and passion. It is needed to bring change, but can delude us into thinking happiness is provided by external pleasures. Excess rajas causes hyperactivity, causing tension and fatigue. Under the influence of rajas, a person might be anxious, indecisive, restless, unreliable, aggressive, judgmental, manipulative, vain, compulsive, dependent, jealous, materialistic. Tamas. This is the energy of inertia, contradiction, and darkness. It is the power of ignorance that makes us resist positive change and creates indifference to our own and other people's well-being. In excess, it causes lethargy. Under the influence of tamas, a person might be depressed, dishonest, prone to addiction, submissive, destructive, dull, hateful, judgmental, apathetic, lethargic. So, how can these three great forces be brought into balance? Balance the mind through selfless service and refining our values. To increase sattva through our actions, we need first of all to realize that we are not separate from others. Karma yoga requires a person to act in the service of others without expectation of material gain. The action needs to be performed for its own sake. The change of focus from oneself to others diverts the mind from self-centered thinking patterns. When we open ourselves up to the pain of others, humans, animals, or even the planet as a whole, we can relate to them with compassion and empathy beyond individual well-being. It aims at the expression of a higher consciousness through the individual. Our dharma is thus to work for the good of all beings. How to practice karma yoga? Think how you can best use your energy, time, material resources, or knowledge for the good of society. Here are some pointers to help on the way. Give what you are doing your full attention. Serve with a cheerful mood. Look for opportunities to serve colleagues, friends, and family. Expect nothing for return for your actions. Be detached from the results of your service. Finish what you start. In his book, The Wisdom of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the well-known spiritual author, speaker, and translator Ravi Ravindra comments, "It is a universal assertion of the sages that there can be no higher consciousness without higher conscience." You can, if we so choose, be mindful of the 10 ethical practices that Patanjali sets out in the 8 limbs of yoga, referred to as the Yamas, self-restraint, and the Niyamas, right observances. Ravi Ravindra says, these are recommended in all circumstances without regard to time, place, or station in life. In other words, these practices are relevant across all cultures, no matter what the social upbringing and material position in life. And a brief description I'll give you now of the yamas and the niyamas, but there is much more to go into and study on this, and we are doing a lot of work on this at the moment in the Theosophical Society. So it is very helpful, but I will give you now a brief description of the yamas, self-restraint, and the Niyamas. Non-violation, ahimsa in Sanskrit. Seeking to do good for others, wishing them well, and avoiding causing harm through thought, words, and actions. Truthfulness, satya. Being truthful to ourselves is essential, as without this, we are incapable of introspection. Being truthful to others is also essential, since respecting our values is the foundation of a healthy mind. Non-stealing, asteya. Taking what belongs to others makes the mind tamasic, resistant. This includes property and material possessions, as well as being careful not to take too much from the world without giving back. Containment, brahmacharya. Moderating the pleasures of the senses allows fine energy to build up and be transformed into mental strength. 5. Non-grasping, aparigraha. Greed for material wealth prevents us from being connected to the self, while the clutter from having so many possessions makes it hard to calm the mind. Gratefully accept what you have and don't take more than you need. And the niyamas, the right observances. Number 6, purity. A clean body is achieved through asanas, diet, and daily hygiene. Keeping the mind clean involves avoiding tamasic impressions and not indulging in gossip, criticism, or negative thinking. Contentment. It's number 7. Contentment is feeling gratitude for what life has given us and shows a willingness to work with it. It requires an attitude of patience, knowing that change is slow and that the truth of practice can take a long time to show. The fruits of practice can take a long time to show. Number 8, self-discipline, tapas. To reach full mental health in the form of lasting peace and joy is a worthy goal and so requires many sacrifices. This can only be done with the self-discipline to stay focused on the goal and face the challenges of life. Self-study number 9, swadhyaya. The mind can be nurtured by reading spiritual books, listening to spiritual discourse, listening to fine music, and repeating mantra. Number 10, dedication to Ishwara, surrendering to a higher power. We accept help by opening ourselves up to a higher influence that we can trust. This may be the form of a spiritual teacher or a spiritual teaching. Finally, here are some extracts from an article by yoga teacher Linda Sparrow in the Yoga Journal on Gaia's website. That's just to bring us up to date, published in 2020. All 3 guna are present in every experience in a constantly shifting relationship with one another. One quality is always more present or dominant than the others, depending on what challenge you're facing, and most important, how you respond to it. When you overreact because someone cuts you off in traffic, Rajas becomes dominant. If you emotionally shut down to avoid having a difficult conversation, that's a sign that Tamas has taken the reins. As you emerge from beautiful restorative practice, you may experience the sattvic quality of joy. The quality of sattva is clear, focused, calm, and receptive. It is the fully formed flower, the beauty of a sunset, the bounty from the garden. Internally, it is the gap you experience after the exhalation and before inhalation comes again. And this is very important, the next phrase I'm going to read. The pause, where you are free from thoughts, worries, and judgments, just for the moment, so that you can listen and act more from your higher ego, as H.P. Blavatsky used to call it. To increase your level of sattva, eat fresh foods as much as possible that are organic if you can and local. Go to sleep at a decent hour and wake early at dawn, because according to Ayurveda, this is when your energy is most conducive to meditating. Spend time alone in nature if you can. Commit to being in silence. In the modern world, that also means putting aside your electronics. Practice devotion and provide open-hearted service for the benefit of all beings. Before going to sleep at night, it can be helpful to appraise your thoughts and actions through the day just lived. Then see where they tally with your mindful intentions. Without judging yourself if you see where you may have failed, but rather to see where you may make improvements. If you begin to feel lighter and even less burdened sometimes, then you are sure to be increasing sattva, with all its beneficial effects reverberating in your life and extending to others. Finally, we can use positive affirmations to remind us of our true divine stature. And this one comes from practical Ayurveda, or these come from practical Ayurveda. I am the self. I am the pure light. I am free. I was never born. I will never die. I am bliss absolute.